everybody, this is Perch. I've got a viewer question here. It's kind of a fun one. It'll be a fun conversation. And it's basically, how violent should comics be? A lot of superhero action, a lot of kind of gritty street level heroes could be very, very violent. But do comics take money out of their own pockets when they actually show the violence? Well, uh, yeah, the answer is we all know the answer to the second one. They do. Absolutely, they do. I mean, comics in this way are like the movies, where if you are rating, if the movie's rated R, then you are running the risk, not 100% of the time, but you're definitely taking money off the table that you can, in theory, go after. You may have heard this term. This is why I'll put on my nerdy kind of Professor Perch business hat. It's called the TAM. This is the total available market. When you're shipping a product, when you're doing anything like that, you look at the TAM. What is my TAM for this product? And if you're putting out an R-rated movie, then your total available market, in theory, and you have to work with the laws and everything else, you eliminate the 18 and under crowd as somebody who's going to give you revenue. Now, yes, I know. I said this at one point, and so it was like, well, 16-year-olds sneak into movies all the time. Sure they do. But you can't count on that when you're doing a financial analysis. You can't count on people, breaking the rules, even if the rules are flimsy, even if lots of people do break the rules. When you're doing a financial analysis, you have to do it by the book. Otherwise, you can't make an analysis where you're assuming people are going to break laws. Not that 18-year-old is a law. It's a guy. Anyway, you understand what I mean. It usually, if you're going to make an R-rated film, you're going to show a lot of violence. You're lowering the amount of money that movie can make. This seems to impact the secondary market more than the primary market. What I mean by that is you don't necessarily see a big impact in the movie theater. You'll see some, but you will see a bigger impact in the amount of money you can make for licensing it, say, like Amazon or Netflix or Hulu or wherever to show it. You will take away, because everybody is doing this calculation based on the TAM. So if you put out an R-rated movie and you're like, okay, well, I'm gonna be okay if I make 10% less, but it's going to, in theory, speak to this adult market more. So I'm going to make more from the adult market than I would have normally made. What I mean by that is, if you're putting out, say, a slasher film, if you're going to put out, Friday the 13th part, what are they on now? 20. Sure, we'll go with 20. I'm sure it's not up to that level, but let's say you're putting out, oh, actually, there's a new Halloween movie out right now. Okay, so if you're putting out a new Halloween movie and you rate it PG-13, then a lot of people who would normally go see a Halloween movie because they want to see a good horror slasher film won't do it, because they will say, well, this film is going to blow because it's going to, cheap out on the violence. It's going to basically be made for younger markets, so it's not going to deliver me what I want, which is a good old slasher film with a lot of blood and gore. So therefore, your adult market is going to decrease. The group that normally would go see a horror film may go from, say, 100% available market down to, say, 75, because you're going to lose a quarter of all the audience just by saying, forget it. But one thing movie studios do, and they play with it, is to say, well, if I have a long-running franchise like, say, Halloween, I don't know if this is the case with Halloween, but if you have a long-running franchise, people are going to show up to the movie just to continue to see the movie. They're not going to want to, bail out now. They're going to feel like they have to complete it. So we can go ahead and do PG-13, and our audience will still come to it because they feel they have to, even if they are grumbling, and we'll be able to pick up some kid revenue, and that will be higher than what we normally would have gotten anyway. So that's sometimes the thinking that goes into this. I will say that rarely works, but that is how people think. In comics, it's largely the same. Now, in comics, if you look back to the world of the newsstand, the fear there was, hey, we make so much money from grocery stores, gas stations, other things. We make a very violent comic book. The big chains won't take it, and that's going to be a massive drop, because your Safeway, your Publix, whatever it happens to be that's carrying these comics, are going to go, we're not going to put up with any of the fuss of having a violent comic book out there, so we don't want it. They're not going to pay attention. They're not even going to really think through the TAM. They're just going to say, hey, if there's any concern at all with an 8-year-old kid picking up this book and reading it, then forget it, drop it. And so that's why you saw, and certainly from the mass market, from Marvel and DC and all that stuff, that's why you saw what happened. But if you look at comics, okay, if you look at something like The Punisher, The Punisher, if you read some of those '80s comics, I mean, it was okay, but there was clearly an element of, hey, wait a minute, we're basically reading this comic book about this vigilante that kills criminals and very aggressively kills criminals. How in the world is this going to be a Marvel book that's going to be in a grocery store and sit next to Alf and other things? That won't make a lot of sense. Now they did it anyway, and it didn't make a lot of sense. And in some cases, there were, there was issues. You'd see campaigns every once in a while with people. I mean, what's funny is if you were in comics in the '80s and the '90s, you might remember parent groups throwing a fit when the Punisher skull would be on a comic book because that was going to infect the minds of children and turn them into serial killers or whatever was happening. That was like, we got to get rid of that Punisher skull because it's bad for the youth. And now today in 2021, we got to get rid of the Punisher skull because it's a symbol of white supremacy. It's hilarious how things go. That poor Punisher skull just can't catch a break. Anyway, it's I think there is a market for violent comics. There's been the indie world. There's been things like Faust back in the day, and plenty of stuff more recent. The standards have changed slightly. I think what you can get away with in a comic book today is a little bit different than what you could get away with a comic book in 15 years ago, even 20 years ago. It's evolved. Our tastes have changed. Weirdly, what is strange to me is I think that nudity was more of an okay thing 30 years ago than it is today, because there was a time when you could go to the grocery store and Conan would be there and there'd be women running around topless or wearing very, very little, and you could get your hands on that. That sounds wrong the way that came out, but you understand. You could find that stuff today. Like, I mean, people have an absolute terror fit if Batman Damned features a slight light shadow on the bat penis. I mean, it's amazing. It's amazing how the standards have shifted. It's but overall, I think there's a place for violent comics. I definitely think that if you are doing a property like, say, The Punisher, or something where it is clearly a violent comic by design, then it needs to show some violence. It should. I think the product is always awful when they're trying to kind of skirt the line of saying this is a tough, unflinching look at at this horrible crime, and we're going to show it all off page. And the interview we did with Philip Kennedy Johnson, where he talked about kind of the different hoops that you have to jump through to get something like Aliens out for Marvel. I mean, that's a tough road. I can't imagine. It's going to be very, very hard to get something that they like that done. I don't even know how. A braver, smarter man than me has to do that, or woman, whatever, has to put something like that together, because to make something that is true to a horror book, now granted, a lot about theme and presence and setting and all the rest. It's not just about blood and gore, but it's tough to put something out like that given the current standards of comics. But in general, if you're going to put out something super violent, you're going to lose some of your audience, either indirectly or indirectly. And what I mean by that is, either you're going to put out something very violent and it's not going to appeal to everyone that it could because of the violence, which is sometimes the case, or I think more often and almost all the time, you're going to run into a situation where you put violence in a book, and the audience still wants it, but the shops don't want to carry it, or the distributor doesn't want to put it out, or nobody wants the hassle of this book, because even though they know they can sell it, they're worried about that one mom who's going to come in and buy this book and then go take it on Fox News or MSNBC or wherever it happens to be and go look at the filth that they're infecting our children with. It's kind of bizarre to think about in 2021 that that's still a definite fear, but it is. There's been shots that have come up. I think there was one in one of Mark Millar's books over here in the U.S. where I think it was either nudity or like there's a penis in there, or somebody got ripped in half, or just something, and it was unexpected. And shops got that, didn't pay attention. Some parent came in angry, then the shop has to quickly bag it and note it. And it's ridiculous. It's because there is one person out of 1,000 that's going to come in and want to make a big production out of it. And that's got retailers, it's got people scared to deal with it. They don't want to deal with that headache. Whenever you have a business that's a thin margin business, like comics is, everybody will steer away from anything that's going to provide any kind of friction or hassle or anything that remotely could interfere with just the job of selling comics. And things like crazy parents, things like people who are going to come in and throw a fit. All of these things are friction every time. Anyway, I hope that answers the question. I mean, I think when it's done well, violence can be great in a comic. I mean, especially when it fits the tone and it's providing a more realistic, visceral kind of feel to everything that's going on. I definitely think there's examples of people who inject it in just for shock value, and I think that works less well. But overall, I mean, the story you're telling should be true to itself. If you're telling a kind of gritty street level story about kind of drug use and violence and a lot of kind of just very nasty gritty things, you're going to need to show some things that won't work in a PG film. Martin Scorsese typically doesn't put out PG films. I mean, there's a reason for that. But anyway, let me know your thoughts on does violence work for you in comics? Is that something that you like to see? Are you kind of irritated that you don't have more of it or too much of it? Or what do you think? Let me know in the comments below. Like and subscribe as always, and thanks for listening.